What is up, Bucs fans? We are back live here on a Wednesday. It's Real Bucs Talk, and we have a special guest. I'm very excited to have my friend on here, and that is Josh Queipo from Pewter Report. Josh, it's awesome to have you back on. I know it's been a minute, but it's good to see you on here.
Yeah, it's for this week it feels kind of like a home and home type of podcast. You were gracious enough to accept our invite to be on the Pewter Report every other Sunday live mock draft that we're doing leading up to the draft here in April. And I was over the moon when you asked me to be on your podcast. I'm glad we were able to line up our schedules.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's that time of year where, obviously we're just waiting for a lot of the activities that are going to be popping up here soon with the off season coming, and you have scouting combine coming up next week, and then you have free agency shortly after that, and then it's that build up to the draft, and obviously the last minute evaluations and trying to get everything in order. So yeah, busy times ahead. It should be a lot of fun. I would expect we see some news probably come out next weekend with hopefully trade rumors, free agents, all that good stuff. So first question, are you going to be going to the combine this year with Pewter Report, or?
Unfortunately not. Pewter Report will absolutely have Bucs fans covered. We've got, I want to say, Scott, Matt, Sly, and Bailey. I believe all four of them are going to be able to make the trip. Unfortunately, my schedule just didn't line up quite right for it. I had to kind of choose Senior Bowl or Combine. Both are excellent events. I highly recommend for anybody who's interested in those types of things in the off season. If you ever have an opportunity, highly recommend going to both. But for me, the Senior Bowl, you actually get to see guys like do stuff in pads during those practices. And so I chose that over the combine, where it's really just kind of you get to talk to guys up at podiums, but you're one of 75 people asking them questions, and you don't have much time with them. Probably the best part about going to the combine is that Jason Light and Todd Bowles do like a little session with local media. Only local media is invited to that. You kind of get them in a more intimate setting. You get a little bit more time than you normally do with them in other settings, and you can get a lot of great information. So was hoping to do it, couldn't do both. Decided the Senior Bowl because I like seeing guys do stuff in pads.
Yeah, I mean, you can't go wrong there. I believe with like that local media session you were talking about, is that usually like their breakfast kind of thing where they sit down, or is that more?
No, it's literally like you find like a corner in this giant like ballroom. The way they have it kind of sectioned out, it's at a convention center. There's this really, really big room, and it's kind of sectioned into, it's bisected. On one side of these curtains, you've got basically all these podiums where one day you'll have the executives, the coaches from different teams up there, where they'll talk to like national, like everybody's media. And then on the other side, it's kind of like Radio Row, where they all get their little spaces that they're broadcasting from. And Light and Todd Bowles are, it happens for all the teams. They just kind of find a corner somewhere, and then all the local media kind of gathers around them. And it's well known that for that session, it's locals only. And then they go up to the podium and they'll do national stuff.
Cool. Yeah, I think it was, I must be thinking of like the owners meeting where like they set like an actual table and like gather around. But yeah, I think I remember Jason Light was like sweating profusely at one of these where it was at the combine, I believe, and he was in that like ballroom setting that you were talking about. I don't know if it was last year or like the year before. I know he was like all decked out in a suit, and he was just like sweating like heavily. I can't recall
what
was
last year where I was at, but I mean, the temperature regulation in these settings and that is not always great. And then you have, a billion lights on. So it can get quite hot in some of those settings. Not to mention you're typically dressed for outside, and then you go inside where it's, a lot warmer. Because Indy in March is not always the warmest setting. So you're usually dressed for like, 12-degree weather. Then you go inside and it's like 75 and you're like, oh, I'm going to die.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's awesome stuff. And guys, if you're joining us, I'm joined here by Josh Queipo. He does great work at Pewter Report, so be sure to check that out. He's got really good articles, and we can probably get into some of them here in a little bit. But why we have the combine, on this subject of topics, let me bring this up real quick. Just let's kind of go into like what are we specifically looking for when it comes to the combine. I know it's, these guys are working out in their t-shirt and shorts, and obviously the main goal is to see how athletic these guys are. But what do you personally look for?
I think a lot of it comes down to the position group that you're looking at. So, like, you have edge up here, right? So, for the very first thing is I want to get accurate height weight measurements, because what the schools list for their players is never right. And it's always in the player's favor. So, if you see a school listing a guy at 6'5", 270, he's probably 6'3" and a quarter, 256, right? So so that's the very first thing. And the players will manipulate the weight numbers a little bit. They know what weight that teams want to see, so they'll work to get to that weight. That doesn't mean that that's the weight that they're playing or walking around at, but can they get to that weight? And then the big thing with the combine is they can get to that weight, but then they're also going to do a lot of this athletic testing there. So can they hit the numbers that they want to hit at the weight that they're trying to show teams that they can get to? So that's the very first one. And then you'll see things like, arm length or wingspan. That's really important for certain position groups. I'm glad you brought up corner. So specifically, if you're a Bucs fan, and I know a lot of Bucs fans feel like the Bucs need to take a cornerback. I certainly think they need to take some cornerbacks or improve that room. Todd Bowles has an absolute type when it comes to an outside corner. He's got to be at least 6 feet, and he's got to have long arms and a big wingspan. So those are some of the boxes you're looking to check. And I scout for the draft 2 different ways. I scout for myself just in terms of like an overall players I like, but then absolutely within my capacity at Pewter Report, I'm looking for what seem like Bucs fits. So using free agency a little bit just for this, because I haven't gotten deep into this draft class yet. Somebody like Asante Samuel Jr. I love Asante Samuel Jr. He's a free agent this year, but he's not going to be on the Bucs radar. DJ Reed is not going to be on the Bucs radar. Both of these guys are sub 6 foot corners. So while I really like them, and if I were putting together a list of, hey, these are really talented guys that I'd love to add to a hypothetical cornerback room, yeah, they'd be real high on the list. Adding to the Bucs cornerback room, completely different, and really just doesn't show up on that, because that's not a type of corner that the Bucs look for.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's why I brought up McCollum, because you look at his size, 6'2", 200 pounds. That is kind of what they're looking for. And when you go back to the corners here, I mean, that is a great way to evaluate, size, length, what they have as far as their athletic abilities. That's going to play a huge part. And when we look at like free agent corners, you look at Charvarius Ward from San Francisco, 6'1", he's almost 200 pounds. Like that fits the bill. Another guy we like that we both talked about, Paulson Adebo, like again, same thing. Yeah. So, I mean, like those would be 2 obvious targets to go after in free agency. But back to the combine stuff, I completely agree. I think it's about seeing what they measure in at, what is their athletic ability in terms of their position. I think position matters a lot, especially when you're looking at, let's just keep it on corner. Like corner, you want to see quick feet, be able to turn those hips, hip fluidity, I think is a big thing that you want to look for. So obviously you would love to have a 4.3 guy, but it's not the end of the world if he doesn't run a 4.3. I think it's more important to see how his feet move going laterally, and then also backpedal and coming, stop and start. All those different things play a role. And of course, the film is always going to be the top tier to look at, but if he has that athleticism to combine with his tape, obviously that's going to make him a much better pick to go after.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the 40 time, because there's really only two positions, maybe 2.5 that I would say, where the 40 time is like super important to me. And corner is one of them. And I think you brought up a really good point. Like, they don't have to be a 4-3 guy. Corner is a position where there's a certain threshold in terms of like, can't be slower than this at the 40, in my mind. But in terms of like raw speed, okay, it's really nice to have a fast guy, but it's not one of the traits that I'm putting the most emphasis on. But I definitely want to see the 40 time, and it's got to be like better than like a 4.53. Like, that's really like where I draw the line. Wide receiver, the same thing. Wide receiver is another one where the 40 time does matter, because you're going to ask guys to run, fades and go balls and posts and things like that. You want to see somebody with functional speed. And here's the other thing, for those watching, you've got to take those 40 times into context with the size of the player, right? Like, Mike Evans wasn't a burner in terms of his pure 40 time, but then when you say, well, he's doing it at 6'5", 225 pounds or whatever he was, that's a really fast 40 time that he ran, like, for his size. So I think, again, the context matters there, but those are really the only two positions that I really care about the 40. It's cool to see with the other positions, and it certainly works into like their overall. And I love the account on Twitter. I will shout it out. Math Bomb on Twitter. He does relative athletic scores, which takes into consideration a player's height and weight when looking at all of the different testing that they do to get an overall athletic profile for a guy. But in terms of like the individual drills, those are the only two that I'm looking at 40 as like a really big barometer.
Yeah, no, I think all those are good points. I think, corners, you like you talked about, the threshold is very important. When you look at running backs, I think that threshold can be a little bit higher, or I should say, I guess, lower. Like, it could be in the 4.6 range. It's not ideal. Like, obviously you want someone you want them in the 4.5s at the very least. But
that's,
I think
where
with
acceleration, like that 10-yard split, 20-yard split, much more important than the overall 40-yard time. How often are running backs really running 40 or more yards in a straight line? Like, it does not happen very often. I think Rashad White and Sean Tucker each got one this year. And, that's probably the one that each of them had in the last 2 years, right? And I know a lot of people say, well, Bucky Irving had a bunch of 40-yard. None of them were in a straight line. Right. So yeah, that's kind of the big thing there. But I think one of your commenters said hips. Yeah, 3 cones, short shuttles. That's often a lot more important for some of these other position groups. Corner, receiver, linebacker. That's where I really want to see some of that. How quickly can they flip their hips when they're going from reading a run key into dropping into a zone?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think, linebacker, I think for us, with just the whole KJ Britt experience, we want to see, obviously a guy that can move with some fluidity. I think you have to be able to, start quickly, have that stop and start to be really good, and just quick acceleration. That has to be a thing where a guy can actually get sideline to sideline. Sure, it's a bonus if he runs a 4.4, but it's not necessary. Like you said before the show started, Levante was what, a 4.6, 40. He wasn't super fast.
He ran a 4.65 when he was coming out.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, and if you look at some of these other guys, Fred Warner was not like a 40-yard maven. Bobby Wagner, I don't think, was a 40-yard maven. Like, most of these amazing linebackers aren't guys like Devin White running like a low 4.4 like that. And I'm not saying that, running a low 4.4 is a bad thing. It's just, it doesn't have a high correlation with playing a really high level of linebacker in the NFL.
Yeah. And our good friend Jay Mulletson here, they don't sell 40s in Florida anymore. It's disappointing. Yeah, that's
Jay would be the one who knows that.
Yeah, true statement. But yeah, I mean, with the combine, I think, obviously what teams are looking for is like, how do these guys interview, try to get them to know them a little bit better. I think medical obviously plays a huge role,
Huge.
just to see like if these guys are going to be available for this upcoming season, and also are they going to be healthy throughout their career, like, or are they going to have issues down the road? That always plays a part, and we've seen it where draft picks fall because of it, and it's like, why are these guys falling? And then you find out after the fact they had such and such injury or what have you.
Yep.
So that plays a big role. And but I think the main thing, let's just see how these guys move. And I think for us as tape evaluators, we look, does that match on tape? I think that's the biggest thing. And like, is the functional athleticism showing up when they're doing these drills? That is just what I'm personally looking for, and I think it plays a big part. And also like leads me to my next question, like the story of Bucky Irving, and just touch on that, of how like this guy didn't have a great combine. I mean, what was his RAS score? It was under sub 3, I believe.
It was not great, but one of the things is I don't think he tested in a ton of the drills. So like gotcha. He didn't do what I think the drills that would have really set off for him, which were the agility drills, the short shuttle and the 3 cones. So he did the broad jump and the vertical jump, which tends to highlight explosiveness. And then he did the 40-yard dash, which wasn't like a terrible number. And his 10-yard split on the 40 was actually fairly good. But his 40-yard dash was 4.55. So you're looking at, okay, he's a smaller back, right? That goes into that RAS score that Math Bomb puts out. So he's small for his position. And then, well, if you're small, typically the successful smaller backs in the NFL are guys who are really, really fast. And his wasn't that fast. Like his 40-yard time wasn't that fast. And I think, so Mock Draftable has a slight difference here from what RAS has. Mock Draftable had him at 4.55 on the 40 and 1.54 on the 10-yard split. And that 10-yard split actually looks a lot better when it's 1.54 versus 1.61. But the vertical and broad jumps were both really, really bad. You can see very poor. So his overall RAS score was really, really bad. Now, why is that like important? And to your point, go back to the tape. And you and I were texting about it. I was like, I loved his tape, but then I saw this. And this just means that he's an extreme outlier. And what I mean by that is if you go back and look at the entire population of Pro Bowl players since these numbers have really been tracked in databases, and the entire population of all pro players and just good franchise players, the correlation between that population and high relative athletic scores or just high athleticism is extremely strong. I want to say the correlation is well over 90%. You rarely have a guy with that type of relative athletic score who does what Bucky Irving did last year. And there's always going to be the exceptions that prove the rule. Bucky is one, right? But then you have to ask yourself, are you willing to bet? And how often are you willing to make those bets that somebody with poor athleticism is somehow that good that he can overcome those shortcomings, but with his high IQ, right? It doesn't happen very much. That's why it's called the exception. So you have to be really, really secure in your evaluation. You're probably not going to do it very often, and you're going to pick your spots. Let's keep in mind the Bucs got Bucky in the 4th round last year.
Fourth round.
Okay, that's a day 3 pick. You want to take a shot on a day 3 pick once every few drafts? That's fine. I'd rather spend most of my picks on the high athletic guys. Now, just because a guy is really athletic, does that mean he's absolutely going to be a good football player? No, but he has a higher likelihood of it. I think that's the most important takeaway there.
Yeah, for sure. And, just, speaking to that, it's just, it's crazy how he has that testing and then, comes out with the season that he just came up with. And I think it just shows you like that his tape was so consistent. Like I guess the signs were there, like he could overcome this. And again, the athletic score of the 10-yard split being what it was, obviously that played such a huge role because he had that quick acceleration, the ability to see things before they would happen. And obviously he had the season that he had.
I think it also highlights the information that we in the public space have versus what teams have.
Right.
And I'll point your viewers in the direction of just to kind of get a glimpse into what that is. If you like Google Senior Bowl 2025 zebra testing scores, I think it is, you can find some of the data that teams are getting from colleges and see some of the different types of data. And I think this goes back to an old story about Cooper Kupp and how the Rams were able to get him later in the draft, is because these days zebra tracking, all the players have chips in their pads, right? And we know that the ball has a chip in it and everything like that. This is how Next Gen Stats is able to give you the stuff like this player reached 22.36 miles per hour on this particular play, right? Not only does it give you like speed, it gives you acceleration, deceleration, and that's some of that information that teams are able to get. So taking this back to Cooper Kupp, I want to say he ran like a slow 40 either at his pro day or at the combine or something like that, but the Rams had his tracking data that he could easily get up to over 20 miles an hour, and so they felt comfortable with his athleticism that went beyond traditional combine testing. And that's why they felt comfortable taking him. And obviously Cooper Kupp for a stretch there was one of the top 3 wide receivers in the NFL. So, but for your viewers, if you do that Google search, you can actually see some of the data that teams are able to get from the Senior Bowl. Then they often have this data from like colleges and things like that. But that gives them not only top speed, but acceleration, deceleration. At the Senior Bowl, they give you how many yards a guy runs for an entire day, like just even in between plays and everything like that. Just how much does the guy move, right? Like explosive, I think they call them explosive efforts. So some really cool data in there that goes well beyond the traditional combine testing. Teams obviously take the combine testing, but they're getting so much more of this to get a more comprehensive look at these players. I have no doubt that the Bucs had some of those agility measurements outside of Bucky's testing, which he didn't test in the agility drills. And that's why they felt comfortable taking him when they did.
Right. Yeah. Agreed there. Is there any certain players that you are, I guess, looking forward to at the combine? Do you have like any certain players that you're anxious to see?
I think that one of the big ones would be Carson Schwessinger, the linebacker out of UCLA, if I remember correctly. Just trying to see what kind of athletic testing he's able to put up. Jihad Campbell would be another one. He could come up my board a good bit if his testing is really good, because for me, like when I look at him on film, I'm not as impressed with the functional athleticism as a lot of other evaluators are out there. I'm going to be very low on Campbell versus, I think, the consensus there. Oluwafemi Oladejo would be another one on the edge. Donovan Ezeraku. I think if he has solid testing, he's going to solidify himself as a day 1 pick. He's, I think, edge 2 for me right now. Yeah, I've got him ahead of Mike Green at this point. So those are some of the players so far that I've done some scouting on that I'm really interested in. And then I just tweeted about him earlier tonight, but I'll be really interested. And I don't even know if he got an invite to the combine. So it may actually be his pro day testing, but where do I have him? Safety Jordan Hancock out of Ohio State. So he plays the slot, plays safety. I was really impressed with some of his tape, and I'm interested to see what the testing looks like for him.
Yeah, all those are great names. I think for me, I'm looking at these corners. Like I'm intrigued by like what is the reports for Savon Ravel, or what's the reports for Benjamin Morrison as far as injuries go, and like where's the recovery. Like those 2 names like could be potential first round picks for the Bucs, and I want to see like how what is the latest with them? Are they going to be able to like work out for like pro day potentially, or what is that kind of, where are they at kind of thing? What's their status? I'm looking forward to those guys. I'm really excited to see Mike Green. I think I want to see how fast he can run, because I feel he's got the speed on tape. I just want to see if like the explosiveness is there, like what's his vertical, all those things are going to play a big part. So looking forward to that. I'm with you on Ezraku. I'm a big fan of him. I just finished his film this past weekend, and he was
it's good.
he was impressive, to say the least. So
I
it's great tape. Like yeah, for sure. I mean, he's got everything in his toolbox as far as like finding ways to bend around the corner. He's got inside moves that he does, spin moves. So there's just a lot to his game that is exciting. I agree with you. If he can run probably somewhere in the 4.6s and just be quick as far as like the shuttle times and like the 3-cone, I think that will, obviously solidify him as a probably top 40 pick when it's all said and done.
Yeah, I think the big one for him will be the 10-yard split, because I think the biggest question mark in his eval right now is, does he really have like the burst off the line, that explosiveness that you obviously want in an edge defender? So if he can hit like a quick 10-yard split, and I'll pull like what that would look like for him. Let me pull it. I've got it somewhere here. You would want to see that 10-yard split at like 1.6 or 1.65, somewhere in that range. And if he hits that, I think that solidifies him. I think that's really the big one, because you can see the bend. Like, you don't need the 3-cone drill for him. You don't need the short shuttle, because all of that's on tape. His functional kind of dexterity in his ankles and his knees and his hips. For him, it's just, can he get off the line quicker? And can he do it from like, is it a stance issue, or is it just that he's just not that quick off the line? And if so, okay, that changes who he can be at the next level.
Right. Yeah, no, that's exactly it. I think it's just taking those numbers and seeing, what can this guy do, as far as like, does it match up, like we said, with the tape, and all those things come together, you get that confirmation. And Mark says it here, he joins us in the chat. Athletic testing should be used to confirm exactly what you saw on tape. I think that's the biggest thing. You have to look at ability and see how that ability is used situationally. So yeah, that's a great point there, Mark.
I think it's outstanding. And I would flip it as well. You can do it both ways. So if it confirms what you saw on tape, great. If it's completely different than what you saw on tape, go back to the tape and ask yourself why, right? So, and that's where it could be a coaching issue. So I'll use this as Ezraku example, as the example. So let's say he runs this like incredible 10-yard split, right? It's not just the 1.6 to 1.65. It's like 1.56, right? Which is a really, really good number. Okay, well, why isn't that on tape, right? So then it becomes, is he mistiming the snap? Is it a coaching issue in terms of how he's being coached in his stance? And if you can start to develop why doesn't it match? And then can that why be overcome at the next level? So can the next coach put him in a different stance, or correct maybe like a hitch in how he's getting off the line versus when he's just told run real fast in this one direction? Those things can say, okay, that's where you can say, okay, this is why the tape and the pure athletic testing doesn't match, and it's fixable. And then it's like, okay, well, then let's go off the athletic testing in this one particular area.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think all those are great points. And that was a little fun discussion there, just talking about the upcoming scouting combine, and that will be next week, which will be a lot of fun to watch and just see like exactly what these guys can do as far as athletic testing and numbers, and obviously interviews that will play a role. And then you'll see, the Bucs GM and head coach talk. So that will be fun to kind of get an insight of what they're thinking. So yeah, be on the lookout for that, guys. I want to shift gears now. Let's talk a little bit about just what is your thoughts as far as this team going into free agency. Do you feel like they are going to be more aggressive than usual, or how do you feel they're going to play this free agency coming up? And obviously with their unrestricted free agents, what would you do here as far as some of these guys and if you bring them back or not?
Yeah. This is actually the time of year where I become popular again, and everybody stops criticizing me for my Baker Mayfield analysis and says, we're willing to listen to you for these next month and a half, because you're going to tell us how the Bucs can bring in good players. So, yeah, so I think out of everybody on the list in terms of guys who are unrestricted free agents, the two that I would have kind of highest as priorities would be Chris Godwin. And there was some big news that came out, what was it, yesterday regarding Godwin as it relates to the Bucs negotiations with him. Small little nugget, but it's significant. And that was basically Chris Godwin's contract was supposed to void 2 days ago. So that would have been Monday. The language in the contract said 23 days from the start of the new league year, I think is how it was worded. The Bucs and Godwin agreed to move that date to like March 12th or March 14th, somewhere in mid-March. That's significant because once the contract voided, all of the dead cap money that the Bucs had pushed down the road into 2025, 2026, 2027 would accelerate into 2025 and manifest as an $8 million or $18.2 million dead cap hit in 2025. If the two sides are able to come to a new deal before the contract voids, the dead cap money stays in the years that it's been pushed out to. So like 7 million of it would stay in 2025, but the other 11 and change would move back into 2026 and 2027, effectively giving the Bucs $11 million in cap room for 2025 that they wouldn't otherwise have. Now, that would probably get eaten up with Godwin's new deal, but in a sense, you have the same it's the same cap hit, but now you have Chris Godwin on the roster rather than off the roster. And even if they had let the contract void and then re-signed him, you would have this $18.2 million dead cap hit plus the new cap hit for the new deal. So it's significant that the two sides agreed to push the void date back because it signals that they are working on a new deal, and that deal, and they want to get the deal done before the money voids or before the contract voids. So it's a step in that direction. And I would say Godwin coming back is a good business decision for the Bucs. He would be number one priority for me. The second one for me would probably be Ben Bredeson, just to keep continuity on the line. I know Bredeson was not the greatest offensive lineman in the world. He was about average. And in a weak link system, if your worst offensive lineman is average, that's a really good offensive line. And I don't think that Bredeson's going to be extremely expensive. I think my own projections have him at like 4.5 million APY, probably on a 1 to 2 year deal. And I can double check that real quick because I actually have it up here.
Yeah, so probably around like 4 to 5 million is probably somewhere what you're looking at for Bredeson. And I agree. I think, obviously Chris Godwin is going to be a Buccaneer. I'm going to go out there and say it, like he's going to be back. We've all been kind of preaching that. Yeah. Well, I mean, Pewter Report's been saying it, since the season.
We called our shot. Yeah, we called our shot a long time
ago. Yeah. So, Scott's been on top of that. And it makes sense. I mean, when you think about this logically, I mean, Godwin doesn't want to leave. And I think the Bucs, they want to have him with Mike Evans as long as Mike Evans is here, I think you want to keep that tandem together. And it just, from a money situation and everything involved, I think it all lines up for the Bucs to pursue that deal and get him back. So I would expect that to be announced here within the next couple of weeks. And then Ben Bredesen, I agree with you. I think he is a priority because you want to keep that offensive line together. And then I think
that's kind of tier 1 for me. And then tier 2 would be Levante if he wants to come back. That's fine. And this may be a name that surprises some people in terms of that tier 2, but tier 2 for me would be Justin School.
Okay. Yeah.
If you and I have started doing, some draft scouting, the tackle class in the draft is not a year to need tackles. It's not a year to need developmental tackles. Like, it does not look great. So Justin School played pretty well as a swing tackle last year, subbing in for Luke Gedeke for, I want to say it was 3 or 4 games, and then another game for Tristan Wirfs. He's somebody I would prioritize as kind of that tier 2, and bringing him back. I would even put Bryce Hall in that tier 2 as well, because cornerback market and free agency looks pretty good from a starter standpoint. Like, there are a few guys out there who could be starter level. We talked about Charvarius Ward. We talked about Paulson Adebo as Bucs fits. But the depth corners, buddy, I am struggling to find somebody who fits that profile. And I don't know if anybody's going to fit it as well as Bryce Hall. So that would be kind of my tier 1, tier 2. And then everything after that, it's like, take it or leave it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we had a question here from Buccaneer Bruce. He talks about Sua Opeta. Like, is there a possibility he returns, or do you feel like with Bredesen most likely coming back that it's pretty much set and you already have a guy in waiting as far as like Elijah Klein, to kind of compete for that job?
Yeah, for me, Opeta is kind of a take it or leave it guy. He was basically a league min guy last year, then blew out his knee. Right. So now it's like, how recovering from major injuries is a completely different job than playing NFL football. Some guys are good at it. Some guys aren't good at it. Great example, Russell Gage never kind of came back from hamstring injuries. And then I think it was an ACL, right? Like, some guys just lose it. Right. So for me, Opeta is not a guy that I'm sitting there like, this is a must need. It's a take it or leave it. You can find other guys of that ilk or in that kind of level of play for similar money out on free agency. So if it's not Opeta, it's somebody else. So that's kind of my take there. So one of the things that I thought I'd bring up with you, Plus, because it's something that's been brewing in the back of my mind for a while now. And this is the first time I'm going to publicly bring it up. And I throw myself in this bucket as well. Everyone is talking about how you bring back Godwin, you bring back Bredesen, and the offense is the same. Right? And that's good. Let's talk about how that may not be good.
Yeah. I mean, we can definitely talk about that. You have a new offense coordinator.
Yeah.
Obviously that's a big step. There's natural, and yes, this is me showing my growth, Josh, as far as not underestimating the I guess
variance.
The variance and the factors that I can't control, even though I think I can at times.
I go back to, you think about that 2020 team that won the Super Bowl, right? And then in 2021, but then in 2021, the entire off-season narrative, one that we at Pewter Report absolutely discussed, right, ad nauseum, was they're bringing the whole band back together. The entire draft was centered around the fact that they only had like 3 or 4 spots open, right? So they almost drafted for need, and that was one of their not so great drafts, right? Jason Light's been a really good drafter over the course of his tenure in Tampa Bay, especially in the last 7 to 8 years. That draft was not great, right? That was the Joe Tryon-Shoyinka, Kyle Trask, Robert Hainsey actually ended up being probably the best pick for where he was taken, how their careers turned out. That wasn't a great draft, right? But they were basically just drafting for, we have these 4 holes on our roster. We need a backup center. We need a developmental edge, kind of at edge 3, and we need a backup quarterback. So they drafted those, like the top 3 picks. But that entire roster basically was the same year over year. And then what you find out at the end of the season, a little bit different than this, because that was an aging roster, to a certain degree, was maybe the same wasn't the best idea to go with. Not pushing guys, not pushing the back end of your roster to be better, to have better depth, was an issue. Now, the Bucs aren't necessarily doing that with what they've got coming up this offseason, because there needs to be an infusion of talent on the defensive side of the ball. But I think, and this is something I've been trying to guard against in my own head, is the assumption that the offense is fine as is and doesn't need to continually be pushed forward. Is that the best philosophy in terms of thinking? And then that would be, well, then is Godwin the best guy to bring back? Or do you try and bring in a younger, more athletic player at this point? Do you try and upgrade from Bredesen? Do you try and upgrade some of the depth spots? Like, what does that look like?
Right.
Which I think is an interesting thought experiment.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, when we look at those positions that you talked about, another interior offensive lineman, do you go into free agency looking for a potential upgrade at offensive guard? Like, is there someone out there that could be affordable and is better than, say, Ben Bredesen? And then you look at this year's draft, and we've already talked about, like, offensive tackle doesn't look great as far as the draft goes. Interior offensive line, I think there is some guys there, but how early do you go after that said position with what you have to fill defensively? And I think that's like the big topic a lot has been discussed about. This is the defensive offseason that the Buccaneers have to have. Like, they have to improve these spots, and they have to get fundamentally, like, just better overall at those positions. But it goes to a point, and I talked about this yesterday I put a video on the Daniel Jeremiah mock draft where he had us taking Tedero McMillan at 19, and like, if that's a real possibility. And I think someone brought that up here in the chat. Yeah, here it is. Like, T-Mac from Arizona, could that be a possibility if he's available? I think that is something people forget. It's like, you need to take the best possible talent in round 1. And yes, it's ideal if that lines up with a need of yours, but at the same time, you want to take the best player, because that is your job as far as building rosters. You want to continue to elevate guys and elevate your roster. And if you can get a guy like McMillan, who could probably take over for Mike Evans at some point, but at the same time, just provide awesome depth, because these guys get hurt, as we've seen. I mean, Evans and Godwin both went out last year, and even though we still scored, having a McMillan,
Cade Otton was their best wide receiver for about 3 weeks.
Right. And I love Cade Otton. Like, that's tight end one right there. Like,
I was waiting to use that sentence specifically for this podcast and for you. Yeah, I think in general, as a philosophy, the best GMs use free agency to fill holes, and then they use the draft to get better. And I use those wordings very specifically. Now, some people may push back and say, well, what about 2020 with Tristan Wirfs? It's a good point to bring up. My educated guess there would be the Bucs knew where they were picking, that there were going to be at least one of a group of tackles that they felt good about, right? And that's harder to do when you're picking 19, 20, and later. It's very difficult to be able to play through that draft and say, these are the positions that, or this is 1 or 2 positions that we will have a need in. And we feel good that 5 out of 5 players that we feel good about in those positions, at least one of them will be there. When you're picking at, like, what were the Bucs picking that year? Like, I know they traded up the one spot to ensure they got Wirfs, but it was something like 12, right? It's a little bit easier to do that. So as a general rule of thumb, you want to walk into the draft saying, we don't need to pick an X position.
Right.
We can just let the board kind of fall to us. I haven't done a McMillan eval yet, but just based on people I trust, if he's there at 19, he's probably the clear-cut best player available. And at that point, you sit there and say, how can he help our team in 2 to 3 years? And that's really where the draft, especially in the first and second rounds, like, or the first 3 to 4 rounds, how can this player impact our team in 2 to 3 years? Well, in 2 to 3 years, Mike Evans may be retired. In 2 to 3 years, maybe they don't get a deal done with Chris Godwin, right? Which obviously they would know at that point in the draft. But even if Godwin's on the roster, in 2 to 3 years, his next deal ain't going to be for 4 years. It's going to be a 2 to 3 year deal. So in 2 to 3 years, Tet Millen may be your Mike Evans replacement, right? So, and you say, well, what does that do? Now you're drafting wide receiver 4. No, he ain't going to be wide receiver 4 if they draft him. You're drafting wide receiver 3, and then you've got one of the better wide receiver 4s in the NFL. And Jalen McMillan would still find snaps. And if there is an injury to Evans, if there is an injury to Godwin, now all of a sudden you still feel good about your top 3. So that's kind of the thought process there. It's never a bad idea to make a strength stronger.
Yeah, agreed. Like you want to continue to build strengths, and even as much as it would hurt for Cade Otton to be a number 2 tight end, like let's say we draft Tyler Warren.
You brought up the point.
Yeah, like Tyler Warren or Colston Loveland, or even like another tight end in this draft where the tight ends are pretty strong this year, or maybe we go out and, well, I haven't looked at the free agent tight ends. I don't know if that's a good class or not, but
not great.
Yeah. So, but let's just say, I mean, at 19, you're in a spot where most likely like a top pass rusher that you really want is probably not going to be there, at 19. And the same thing goes with like corner. Like, any of these other corners, do you feel really good about them taking them at 19? Like, that's tough. And like, if a guy like Colston Loveland or Tyler Warren is there at 19, you have to think about it. And obviously that instantly improves your tight end room. And now Cade Otton is even better as far as being that supplement to what you already have.
Well, I would even say that Cade probably stays tight end 1 at least for this year. And
right.
Let's assume the Bucs do an extension with him, which I am predicting that happens this offseason. The other thing to look at is like, and I see Bucs fans do this a lot, like there is this assumption that the tight end room is super strong. And that's a lot of projection there. Like Payne Durham, he's had a couple of good moments, but he's replaceable. Like,
yeah.
And then
I expect Devin Culp to overtake him.
It very well could happen. Devin Culp, like that's still a 7th round guy who's made like 5 catches. Like, there's a lot of work that has to be done there. That's not somebody you're sitting there saying, we don't need to draft a tight end because we have Devin Culp. Like, it's, man, Devin Culp flashed. It'd be really cool if he developed. You use if, not because, like in the sentence, right? Yeah. So, and then, Coke Keith is going to be fighting for a roster spot. Like,
the guy can't catch, but I mean, he can block.
Yeah, it's most of the time, right? So, like, this is not like some top 10 tight end room. So, if there's like a really good tight end there, 1st, 2nd, 3rd round, and he's clearly better than any of the players at the positions of need, go with the guy you feel better about the eval, not about the position that has a whole lot in it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, and back to your point of like the offense kind of staying status quo almost. I mean, there is going to be some regression just with the new offense coordinator. Like what Liam Cohen did last year was pretty special, just of his ability to adapt and do all these different things. And you hope Josh Grizzard can be the same as far as maybe taking it to a next level like they talked about. That remains to be seen. We didn't mention running back. Like, this is a very strong draft for running backs. I mean, there's running backs everywhere, and we don't really need a running back, but
I'm
maybe
not going to say anything about running back. I will let the Sean Tucker truthers come for your throat.
Yeah, Sean Tucker has he's got his own fan club, man. It's pretty awesome to see. But running back, I will say we are pretty confident there. Like, there's a good room, and they can build off of that from what they had last year. But back to just looking at this free agency, because I know we're kind of running out of time here. I think what you said as far as addressing needs in free agency, and that brings me to like this guy right here, Shavarius Ward, like going out and getting a top corner, because we expect Jamel Dean probably to be let go, and get someone like this. Or you look at a Paulson Adebo, like, these are targets that you can go out and afford. Even bring up your guy that you wrote about, Tyrell Dotson. Like, this guy can cover, he can blitz, he can do all the things you want as far as the linebacker goes.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in Dotson, and I think that's where you look at most of the big free agency moves in retrospect. They aren't getting unless it's a team that is complete and just needed that one guy to get them over the edge, and that's typically a quarterback, right? The Bucs in 2020, the Rams in 2021. That's usually that move. Sometimes it's an edge rusher. I think what the Rams also went and got Von Miller, but you rarely see teams go out and spend a ton of money filling in a bunch of spots on their team with high-end free agents and then making these strong pushes, right? Kansas City doesn't do that, right? Like, who are some of the other top teams that are always in it? The 49ers don't do that, right?
The Eagles, the Eagles didn't do it.
Yeah, Buffalo. Now, that's not to say that they won't go out and make that one move. So, like, the Eagles went and got Hassan Reddick a couple of years ago, and that did improve their pass rush. Like, they made a big splash there. So, would I be fine with the Bucs making like 2 big moves? Yeah, 1 to 2, right? But then the rest needs to be with players that you feel like you can get the most out of them, but like it's a solid move. So for me, like Tyrell Dotson, like I think I'm at the point now where I prefer him over like any other linebacker in free agency, right?
Yeah.
Ward and Adebo, like I would love those guys as corners, right? Like at edge, I think I'm pretty much on the record as saying like trade for Hendrickson. And I like that move for a couple different reasons, because we just went through like who would be available at 19. And I don't know if I love any of the options that are most likely going to be there at 19. So use 19 and 83 and get back a second and a late round pick from the Bengals and get Hendrickson or sign Josh Sweat. Like, those would be the corner and edge would be where I would want to spend big money. And then at linebacker, I think you can find guys who fit the system, who can improve the athleticism on a cheaper deal, to help fix the linebacker room. Same thing with safety.
Yeah, I think we agree. Like, this team is going to be in on, obviously, their big move, I feel, is going to be at corner. And then the secondary moves, like, it's going to be linebacker, safety as far as value type deals, like you're mentioning. And then we think like they enter in the edge as far as free agency goes, like going after maybe a Josh Sweat or maybe Khalil Mack? Like, do we feel like they're going to be interested in doing those type of contracts?
I don't know if Khalil Mack like that. I don't see that necessarily making sense. I think Sweat, they'll see what the price tag may be. And it did go up after that Super Bowl. He had a really good Super Bowl, right? Yeah. So I think that they may look into that. But if anything, if you look at Jason Light's history, it hasn't been to make that move. It's been to find the Shaq Barrett, somebody who, from an efficiency standpoint, has really stood out, but just hasn't had the reps. Or it's to make that trade for a veteran who they feel really good about the production that's been there, and they're willing to pay that kind of price. That's why I think Hendrickson could just be a supercharged version of them trading for Jason Pierre-Paul, right? So that's why I think that those moves are probably more likely than just going out and trying to find an edge rusher at the top of the market. I just don't see them in on Khalil Mack, maybe Sweat, but then things fall off pretty quickly there. And then it is finding that diamond in the rough kind of in terms of like an edge rusher. So it'll be very interesting. And that's why a lot of the articles that I've been writing, and I've seen people in like the comments like, no, they don't need to cheap out on this guy or that guy. They need to just get Sweat, Ward, Nick Bolton, Javon Holland. And it's like, yeah, I mean, again, they may get one of those guys, but a lot of the roster is going to be filled out with guys who improve a certain aspect of the defense, can probably fit well within the defense, but it's a much more economical kind of addition.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. I think, and like we said, I think corner could be like the big potential splash move with Charvarius Ward obviously wanting out from San Francisco and looking for something different, and he can't get any further than going to Tampa Bay from the West Coast to the East Coast like that. So I feel like that would be like the top move that they're looking at. And then like just trying to find like those value free agents. I mentioned these guys on my channel. I talked about like Bobby Brown from the Rams, like interior defensive line, I think is a very underrated need for this team. And I know a lot of people are telling me, well, Logan Hall, he improved. Like he showed better. He did a lot of different things. he had 5.5 sacks. He's on his way up to that 10 sack season that he predicted. And I'm like,
his 5.5 sacks are very similar to the 5.5 sack season Anthony Nelson had a few years ago. It's if you go and you look at the actual sacks, there's some cleanups. There's a few where there's just a blown blocking assignment. You would be hard pressed to find a lot of really high end reps from Logan Hall.
Yeah.
And I think you and I both feel like his name value at this point probably exceeds his actual value. That's not to say he is not a hard worker on the field. Like he gives his everything, and he has made strides, and he is a perfectly fine rotational interior defensive lineman. But if Kalijah Kancey goes down or Vita Vea goes down and he's the next guy up and now he's your starter, you got problems, man.
Yeah, and that's why I look at guys like Bobby Brown, Levi Onwuzurike, I think is another good free agent. And this draft,
though.
I know, yeah, he's going to be probably closer to 10 million. So that's going to be tough to get.
No, on Onwuzurike is probably going to be closer to 14 to 15.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, there I am again with my underestimating. But
he's probably going to get a deal.
Yeah, no, and he deserves it. Like the guy is really good, especially when he's on the field. He's outstanding. But I like Bobby Brown from the Rams. I think he's a guy that you could plug in. He can stop the run at elite level, push the pocket. And then this
Puna, baby.
What? Puna? Yeah, Puna Ford. Yeah, I love Puna Ford. Like Puna Ford, 29 years old, good veteran. Does all the right things and can pass rush a little bit. Like he can get after the quarterback. So yeah, I would love to see like those types of moves where, 4-5 million maybe in that kind of range. And like you get one of these guys to bring in to upgrade over Greg Gaines, etc. And then also find like an edge in that kind of role. Like maybe, I know you don't like him, but Joseph Osai, you look at K'Lavon Chason from the Raiders, like Malcolm Kuntz maybe. I think a lot of those names that could be a little bit on the value side, I think makes a lot of sense for this team. And the same goes for safety. Like you talked about Jason Pinnock from the Giants. Like those are the type of moves I would expect this team to make, where it sets you up. And this will be our last part of the show, just sets you up for the draft and give you options to really attack the strengths of the draft class coming up.
Yeah, and that kind of goes back to the strategy, right? Like you sit there and you should walk into the draft and say, we feel good with the roster as is, at least from a starting standpoint, with these players in those positions. Now, how can we upgrade and where can we upgrade? And that allows you to say, you know what, we can actually get really, really good here based on this player who has fallen, and we can get great value. And even though, you know, the player we already have in this place is better than the player we have over in this position, we're not getting as good of an upgrade by just drafting out of that necessity or need.
Right. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think that's going to be the goal this offseason. Obviously, raise that depth level as far as quality, and get more depth as far as interior defensive line, edge. Obviously, linebacker is going to be overhauled, and then the secondary, finding value there to raise the level of play, and obviously make McCollum coming back, and then obviously you have Bryce Hall. I would love to see him come back as well. I think that would be a good depth move. So when you look at it, this team, I think there's options. They have a lot of flexibility. They could be very aggressive. So should be a lot of fun. I mean, I'm excited to see how they attack, the upcoming months, and see what comes out of it. But Josh, just kind of want to get your final thoughts of just the upcoming offseason and what you feel you can expect from this team coming up.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, I think that the team feels like they are on the precipice of that Super Bowl roster. And I think that they are going to be aggressive about improving the roster. Does that mean that they are going to get the top free agent or one of the top 3 free agents at every single position that fans feel is a need? No, that's not what I'm saying there. But I do think that they are going to be aggressive about finding traits that will improve the roster at different position groups. In terms of so my niche when I originally broke into kind of football journalism, the Pewter Report, is surrounding contracts and cap management. So I guess my big parting words on here for your listeners would be, or your viewers, from a cap standpoint, if you're going to ask at any point, whatever player you're considering the Bucs adding, if your question is, well, could they afford it from a cap standpoint? The answer is yes. I'm going to just say that right now. They are in a very good cap position, and from a salary cap standpoint, whoever they want to bring on, they will be able to bring on and make it work from a cap perspective. The big thing that I think is going to, what's the word I'm looking for, control who they bring in this year is not cap, but the amount of cash that the team is willing to spend. Every year, owners set a budget for their operations department. This is how much I'm willing to actually write physical checks for. Okay.
Yeah.
Since Jason Light's been with the Bucs, that's typically been around 7% higher than what the salary cap is for that year. So we literally just found out earlier today that the salary cap is going to be somewhere between, I think, $276.5 and $281.5 million this year, which comes in higher than almost anybody out there in the public space was expecting, myself included. And I was one of the highest. I thought it was going to be 275. Everybody else was thinking 270 to 272. It even eclipses my number. So if you just use the 280 for a round number and you say 7.5% over that, is about $300 million worth of checks that the Glazers might be willing to write this year. Right now, their spending based on the roster as is around $199 million, which means that they have about, based on my estimates, about $100 million to spend. Now, of that $100 million, 20 or so would go to Godwin, right? K. Dotton and Luke Gedeke are probably going to get extensions. You're looking at another probably $33 million right there. So there's 53. So you just spent half of it on 3 internal players, right? They bring Bredesen back. Okay, there's another 4. So now you're at 57. So that gives them about $43 million to play with. That's the number that you should be looking at. And when you say, well, how do I know how much they would spend in the first year on a player? Just assume it's the APY that the guy gets on the deal. There's no real manipulation to the cash flows. Players want fairly even or upfront cash flows. So that's the best way to kind of think about it when you're asking yourself, can they afford this player? Don't think of it in cap, think of it in cash. And 40 to 50 million is probably the number on external guys. based on what I think they're going to do internally.
Yeah, awesome stuff. And like the quote always says, cash plays. That
Yeah,
is
there you go. I like that.
That is it. And I think, I mean, your tweet earlier before the show, this team can do what they want. Like, they have good cap flexibility, like you talked about. The money's there. They can be as aggressive as they need to be as far as getting guys in here. Question is, how far do they take it, to that extent? And so yeah, that's really great points. Guys, I hope you all enjoy this. Josh, let the good people know how they can find your work and obviously all the great stuff you do at Pewter Report.
Yeah, so Bucs related, obviously this is a Bucs podcast. So pewterreport.com, on YouTube, the Pewter Report YouTube channel. We're doing a lot more video content. I've got a 3-video series going over the cap and cash as it relates to the Bucs off season. I would highly recommend. On Twitter, you can find me at Josh_Queipo, as you see it here on your screen. And then if you will be so kind as to let me plug one more thing, if you're looking for more stuff around contracts and just the financials of the NFL as it relates to the league at large, not just the Bucs, I do have a Substack that you can find. It's my pinned tweet on my Twitter. And kind of the cool thing that you can find on that Substack right now, can't really find anywhere else right now, I have over 400 contract projections for upcoming free agents. So if you like to build rosters in your head or on a spreadsheet somewhere, and you're like, I want to know how much this guy would cost, chances are he's going to be on that list. So you can find that at my Substack. It's $50 for the entire year, or $5 a month. So we've got some really great content on there, including over 125 extension candidates this year across the NFL. So that's where you can find my stuff.
Awesome, man. It's always a pleasure to have you on, Josh. Guys, if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit that like button. Comment down below your thoughts of, what you expect for upcoming free agency. If you have any questions for either Josh or myself, let us know, and we'll definitely, reach back out to you. Again, you can find us on X or Twitter. Hit us up there. We're always welcome to talk Buccaneers football, and Josh is definitely a guy to follow for sure. He does great work with Pewter Report, and also I will be checking out his Substack for sure. I have to know these numbers so I can kind of, talk smart here when I'm on the live stream for sure. So there you have it, guys. Hope you all enjoyed it. Josh, it's always a great time talking with you, my friend. So looking forward to the next one. We'll have to get you back on here probably sometime, during, free agency or maybe before the draft for sure. So with that said, everyone have a great night and go Bucs.